Welcome. We're going to be talking about variables, claims, and validities in this chapter. So there is a whole lot here. We're going to try and pull it together in a way that is useful for you. So in terms of variables, there are two kinds that we're really most interested in: measured variables and manipulated variables. Measured variables are those that we observe and record. That's it. So for example, temperature or the speed at which someone runs. Manipulated variables are controlled, and often we are assigning them to one or another group. So some variables can only be measured. So things like age, gender, race, those are measured variables. Some can be either manipulated or measured. Speed at which one runs, attention. So we're going to be paying attention to that. Paying attention and thinking about those in the next slide. So as we're going through, think about whether we're talking about a measured variable or a manipulated variable. And there are other examples in the PowerPoint. So the researcher stands at an intersection and records whether drivers are using cell phones. The driver's behavior is measured or manipulated. Think about how you would know that. Were you assigning people to using cell phones? If so, then it would be a manipulated variable. If not, if you're just observing it, then it's a measured variable. The researcher has participants operate a driving simulator. She assigns some participants to drive while talking on a hands-free phone, and others to drive while talking to a passenger sitting nearby. Whether drivers talked on a phone or to a passenger is measured or manipulated. Certainly you're observing it, but did we assign people to groups? And if so, then we're talking about a manipulated variable. Researchers have participants solve anagrams. Some participants solve difficult anagrams, some solve easy anagrams, some solve medium difficulty anagrams. Anagram difficulty is, again, think about, are we observing it? Have we assigned people to groups? And finally, researchers place volunteers in an fMRI machine, which detects brain activity in the occipital cortex, so the back of the brain. Brain activity in the occipital cortex is measured or manipulated. Which are you doing? Okay, so let's now move on and think about ways of describing variables. And there's a bigger version of this table in your book. So we can think about a variable as a construct or a conceptual variable, and we use those terms interchangeably. It's a concept that we're studying: satisfaction with life, motivation, love, intelligence. The conceptual variable or definition is how we are carefully defining that construct. So for example, if we're looking at satisfaction of life, Diener et al. Describe it as, or define it as, a person's cognitive evaluation of his or her life. third piece is our operational definition. So this is how the construct is actually measured or manipulated in an actual study. So for example, we have a 5-questionnaire or 5 questionnaire items on the satisfaction with life scale that are answered on a scale from 1 to 5. So it's a Likert scale. That is how we are operationalizing it. And somebody else might operationalize satisfaction with life in a different way. And that's part of why we have so many different bricks that we're using. But those differences are important. They help us to recognize how things, that overall pattern that we're looking at. So we often are using more than one there's more than one way that we can operationalize a construct. So our construct is school achievement, but we could assess that using self-report. You might think about some of the pros and cons to doing that by actually checking student records, or by asking teachers to rate how students are doing. And each of those different operational definitions of school achievement can be useful and can also have some flaws. Okay, so we have to be thinking carefully about the pros and cons to those things. Think about COVID and how we might operationalize, the degree to which COVID is a problem within the US. One way is to simply count the number of deaths from COVID. And as you can see here, COVID deaths, it's right here, fewer than for cancer or for heart disease, but certainly more than other or many other diseases, at least in 2020. Now, one of the difficulties with this is that death certificates are often either intentionally or unintentionally somewhat obscure. When someone dies of COVID, for example, they also, it may not be the COVID that kills them, but one of a number of other kinds of factors. So for example, flu and pneumonia are extremely, contribute to deaths by COVID about 48% of the time. Respiratory failure, about 39% of the time. And if we're looking at death certificates alone, that may be complicated, right? Another way that we could be looking at COVID, that we could operationally be defining our conceptual variable, our construct, the rate at which COVID is impacting our country, is by looking at the daily share of population with a fever. We believe that this should be constant across time and consistent across the country if COVID is not impacting not impacting fevers. What we do see, however, is that that fevers have increased in the US over this period of time and have now stabilized. But that that seems to be dependent on the part of the country that we're looking at. So in the Northeast, it climbed significantly, but has dropped. Where in the South during the same period, it increased and continued to increase. Same for the West. So, you know, there are different ways that we can measure COVID or measure any variable. And we need to be thinking about that and what the costs and benefits, the pros and cons are of using one particular strategy. Here's another way that we can think about this. You know, what is a mass shooting? And different groups have different kinds of measures. The Gun Violence Archive argues 4 or more people, excluding the perpetrator, shot in one location at roughly the same time. And they're not making exclusion based on circumstances, so they might include a robbery, for example. Mass Shooting Tracker Project looks at a single outburst of violence in which 4 or more people are shot. Congressional Research Service looks at 4 or more people murdered with firearms within one event and in one or more location in close proximity. So often in what we think of as a mass shooting, someone may move from one place to another, rather than only shooting in a particular place. And finally, Mother Jones says 4 or more killed, excluding shootings stemming from more conventionally motivated crimes, such as armed robbery or gang violence. And as they note, it's a more conservative measure of the problem because we have fewer shootings with fatalities. And I'm going to stop here. In our next video, we're going to start looking at different kinds of claims. In particular, we'll be looking at frequency claims and association claims.